She was hired to be the nanny, but on the first day, she accidentally locked the millionaire CEO in the basement. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what's the most embarrassing mistake you've ever made at a new job? And at the end of the story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy. The click of the old iron lock was sharp and horribly final. Rebecca Morgan froze, her hand still on the ornate, ridiculously oversized key. She jiggled it. Nothing. She turned it the other way. Still nothing. A cold, sinking dread began to pool in her stomach. No, 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 she whispered, pulling at the heavy oak door. It didn't budge. Not even a millimeter. This couldn't be happening. It was her first day. Her first hour, to be precise. She had been hired as the nanny for the esteemed Powers family. The agency had given her strict instructions: be professional, be discreet, and above all, do not disturb Mr. Powers, who worked from his home office and valued his privacy above all else. The housekeeper, a kind but flustered woman named Martha, had shown her around the cavernous mansion, pointing out the playroom, the kitchen, and finally, the old basement door. "This door sticks," Martha had warned, her voice hushed as if speaking of a family curse. "It's a very old lock. Just be careful with it." Rebecca had only been trying to be helpful. She saw the key was left in the lock at a crooked angle and thought she'd straighten it. One little turn to the right, a satisfying click, and now, this. From the other side of the door, a man's voice, calm but laced with an icy authority that sent a shiver down her spine, spoke. "Is someone out there?" Rebecca's blood turned to ice. She hadn't realized anyone was down there. Martha had said Mr. Powers was in meetings all day. "Hello?" the voice repeated, a sharp edge of impatience creeping in. "I heard the lock. Did you just lock this door?" Maybe?" Rebecca stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. There was a pause, followed by the sound of a hand trying the doorknob from the inside. It rattled uselessly. "Unlock it. Now," the voice commanded. It was the kind of voice that didn't make suggestions. It gave orders and expected them to be followed instantly. "I'm trying," Rebecca said, her own voice rising in panic as she wrestled with the key. "It's stuck. The housekeeper said it sticks." A heavy, world-weary sigh came from the other side of the door. "Of course she did. Who are you?" "I'm Rebecca Morgan, the new nanny." Another pause, this one longer, heavier, and filled with a sense of dawning, cosmic horror. "You're the nanny," the voice said, each word dripping with disbelief. "My new nanny. And on your first day, you've managed to lock me in my own basement." Rebecca squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the marble floor would open up and swallow her whole. "In my defense, it's a very confusing lock. It looks like something out of a medieval castle. It's a 19th century German bolt lock. It's not confusing, it's an antique," the voice retorted, the anger now clearly audible. "And I am now on the wrong side of it. Do you understand the problem?" Yes, I understand," Rebecca cried, pulling at the key with all her might. "I'm so sorry, miss. I'm sorry. I don't even know your name. The agency just said Mr. Powers." "I am Mr. Powers," the voice ground out. "Henry Powers, your new and likely very temporary employer." Rebecca stopped pulling. Her hands dropped to her sides. Henry Powers, the reclusive billionaire CEO of Powers Corp. The man the agency had described as a genius and a hermit who hadn't been the same since his wife passed away 2 years ago. And she had just locked him in the basement. "I am so fired," she whispered to the unyielding oak door. "That is a very strong possibility," Henry's voice came back, dry as a desert. "But before we get to your termination, could you perhaps focus on the more immediate problem of my incarceration?" "Right? Okay." Galvanized back into action, Rebecca renewed her attack on the lock. "I can fix this? Do you have a bobby pin?" "A bobby pin?" The disbelief in his voice was palpable. "Are you planning to pick the lock? Is that a skill they teach at nanny school now?" "I've seen it in movies," she said defensively, fumbling in her hair for a pin. "How hard can it be?" She jammed the pin into the keyhole and wiggled it. A small piece of metal broke off inside with a faint ping. Rebecca froze. "Uh-oh." "What was that?" "What was uh-oh?" Henry's voice was dangerously quiet now. "Nothing. A happy sound. The sound of progress," she lied, frantically trying to fish the broken piece out with her fingernail. It sounded like a piece of metal breaking inside the lock mechanism. "Your ears are very good," she said with forced cheerfulness. "Okay, new plan. Is there another way out?" "It's a basement, Miss Morgan. It was specifically designed to have only one way in and one way out. For security." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Rebecca leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door, utterly defeated. "Okay, I'm gonna have to call a locksmith." "A brilliant idea. Why didn't you suggest that before you attempted to perform amateur surgery on my antique lock with a hairpin?" he asked sarcastically. "I don't have my phone on me," she admitted, the panic rising again. "I left it in my bag in the kitchen so I wouldn't be distracted on my first day." "Because I'm a professional." A long, suffering groan came from the basement. "Of course you did. Don't worry, Mr. Powers, I'll find a phone. This house must have phones, right? Like landlines? People still have those?" She was rambling now, her mind racing. "I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere." "Where exactly would I go, Miss Morgan?" he yelled at the retreating sound of her footsteps, but she was already gone, her sneakers squeaking on the marble floor as she ran off in search of a telephone. Henry Powers stood in the darkness of his basement, surrounded by shadows and silence. He ran a hand over his face. This was not how his day was supposed to go. He had only come down here for a moment of peace. It was his late wife's birthday, and the basement was where he kept her things, her old paintings, her books, her collection of antique whatnots. The 19th century German bolt lock had been her idea, a quirky, romantic touch she'd adored. Now it was his prison. And his jailer was a walking, talking catastrophe who thought you could pick a complex lock with a bobby pin because she'd seen it in a movie. He sank onto an old wooden crate, the scent of lavender and old paper from his wife's things filling the air. He should have been furious. He was furious. But underneath the anger, there was another, more foreign emotion bubbling up, a sort of stunned, incredulous amusement. "Rebecca Morgan," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. He had a feeling his quiet, orderly, and very silent house was about to become a whole lot noisier. Rebecca sprinted through the opulent hallways of the Powers mansion, her sneakers squeaking comically on the polished marble. A phone, my kingdom for a phone," she chanted under her breath, a mantra of pure panic. "Fired before my first snack break. This has to be a new record." She skidded into the kitchen, a vast, stainless steel wonderland that looked more like a television cooking show set than an actual room. Her eyes scanned the pristine counters. No phone. She checked the living room, a space so large it could host a small wedding. Nothing. Finally, she found Martha, the housekeeper, dusting a porcelain vase that probably cost more than Rebecca's entire college education. "Martha," Rebecca gasped, out of breath. "Emergency. I need a phone, and a locksmith, preferably one who performs miracles on 19th century German bolt locks." Martha turned, a placid, slightly confused look on her face. "Oh dear, a locksmith? Is something broken?" "You could say that," Rebecca waved her hands frantically. "The basement door, it's locked, and Mr. Powers is on the other side of it." Martha's eyes widened in horror. She put a hand to her chest. "Oh my heavens, not again." "Again?" Rebecca shrieked. "This has happened before?" "Well, the lock is very temperamental," Martha said, wringing her hands. "Mrs. Powers, bless her soul, always said it had a personality, a very stubborn one." "It's a door, Martha, not a moody teenager," Rebecca exclaimed. "Do you have the locksmith's number?" Martha frowned in concentration. "Let me see. I believe it's in the address book." By the main telephone, she pointed a trembling finger towards a small antique desk in the corner. Rebecca rushed over and flipped through the leather-bound book. She found it, scrawled under L. "Locksmith, the guy with the van." There was no number. "There's no number," Rebecca cried, holding up the book in despair. "Oh dear, I suppose I always just call him," Martha said, patting her apron. "On what, Martha?" "My mobile, of course," Martha said, pulling a flip phone from her pocket with the slow, deliberate movements of a sloth. She squinted at the tiny screen. "Now, where did I put my glasses?" 10 agonizing minutes later, Martha finally found the number and made the call. "He says he can be here in 3 hours, she announced, her face apologetic. "He's on a very difficult job in the city." 3 hours? Rebecca felt faint. She was going to be trapped in a house with a furious billionaire, locked in a basement for 3 hours. This was officially the worst first day in the history of employment. She trudged back to the basement door, the bearer of bad news. She knocked softly. "Mr. Powers, it's Rebecca. Have you found the key to my freedom, or just another bobby pin to sacrifice to the lock gods?" His voice came back, dripping with sarcasm. "Good news and bad news," she said, leaning against the door. "The good news is, I've called a locksmith. And the bad news? He's on another mission and won't be here for 3 hours." The silence from the basement was so profound, so heavy with unspoken rage, that Rebecca was sure she could hear his blood pressure rising. "Wonderful," he finally said, his voice dangerously low. "Absolutely wonderful. 3 hours, in a basement, with no Wi-Fi. What do you suggest I do to pass the time, Miss Morgan? Contemplate the futility of existence?" "You could organize," she suggested weakly. "Or maybe take a nap." A dry, mirthless laugh came through the door. "I am not taking a nap. I am supposed to be on a conference call with Tokyo in 20 minutes. A call that will determine the fate of a $200 million merger." Rebecca's stomach twisted into a painful knot. She hadn't just inconvenienced him. She had potentially derailed his entire international business empire. "Oh my God. I can try to explain to them. Do you have their number?" "Yes, it's in my phone, which is in my office, on the 3rd floor. Not, as you may have noticed, in the basement." It was at that moment of peak disaster that 2 small figures appeared at the end of the hallway. A little girl of about 7, with her father's serious blue eyes and long, dark hair, stood silently holding a book. Beside her, a boy of about 5, a carbon copy of his sister, but with a mischievous grin, was dragging a toy dinosaur by its tail. "Who are you?" the little boy asked, his voice clear and loud in the quiet hall. Rebecca's heart stopped. The children. In her panic, she had completely forgotten about the children. She was the nanny. She was supposed to be watching them. "I'm Rebecca," she said, forcing a smile. "I'm your new nanny." The little girl Lily just stared, her expression unreadable. The boy Leo walked right up to the basement door and knocked. "Daddy, are you in the dungeon?" "I'm in the basement, Leo." Henry's voice came through the door, his tone instantly softer, the icy rage replaced by a weary parental sigh. "And it's starting to feel like a dungeon, yes." Lily's eyes widened. She looked from the door to Rebecca. "Did you lock him in?" she asked, her voice a quiet, serious whisper. "It was an accident," Rebecca said, feeling about 2 inches tall. Leo pressed his ear against the door. "Is he yelling?" "Daddy doesn't yell." "He was yelling a little," Rebecca admitted, "but he's much calmer now." "I am not calm," Henry's muffled voice shouted from the basement. "I am the opposite of calm. I am marinating in a state of profound uncalmness." Leo giggled. He used a big word. "Daddy, are you playing hide and seek?" Lily asked the door. "Something like that, sweetheart." Henry sighed. "And I'm losing badly." Rebecca took a deep breath. She may have failed spectacularly as a locksmith and as an employee, but she was a nanny. This she could handle. "Okay," she said, kneeling down to the children's level. "It looks like your dad is going to be working in the basement for a little while. So I'm in charge. What do you two usually do around this time?" "We read," Lily said, holding up her book. "We eat," Leo announced decisively. "I'm hungry. Can we have lunch?" Lunch. Of course. It was almost noon. These small humans needed to be fed. "Absolutely," Rebecca said with a confidence she absolutely did not feel. "What would you like?" "Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches." Leo cheered. "Okay, peanut butter and jelly it is." Rebecca stood up. "I'm just going to find the kitchen again, and the peanut butter and the jelly. Jelly is in the second pantry, top shelf on the left," Henry's voice instructed from the basement. "Bread is in the warmer drawer. And for the love of God, use the raspberry, not the marmalade. Leo hates marmalade." Rebecca stared at the door. He was now parenting from his prison. "Got it," she said, trying not to let the absurdity of the situation make her laugh. "No marmalade." She led the children to the kitchen, Leo chattering about dinosaurs and Lily walking silently beside her, still observing her with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. Rebecca found everything exactly where Henry had said it would be. As she made the sandwiches, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. She knew how to do this. She knew how to care for children. "Your dad," she said to Lily as she sliced the crusts off the bread. "Is he always so grumpy?" Lily considered the question seriously. "He's not grumpy," she said finally. "He's just sad, since Mommy went to heaven." The simple, honest statement hit Rebecca harder than any of Henry's angry shouts. Of course, His wife, 2 years ago. The agency had mentioned it. He wasn't just a reclusive billionaire. He was a grieving widower, a single father trying to hold everything together. "I miss Mommy," Leo said, his cheerful tone suddenly subdued. "She used to make the best sandwiches. She put smiley faces on them with the jelly." Rebecca looked at the plain, crustless squares she had made. On impulse, she picked up the jelly spoon and carefully drew a wobbly smiley face on each one. When she presented them to the children, Leo's face lit up. "Just like Mommy's," he exclaimed, taking a huge bite. Lily gave Rebecca a small, shy smile, and for the first time, Rebecca felt like she might actually belong here. She made a third sandwich, cut it in half, and carried it back to the basement door, along with a glass of water. She slid the plate under the door. The gap was just big enough. "Mr. Powers?" she said softly. "You should eat something too." There was a long silence from the other side. She heard the faint sound of the plate being picked up. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its earlier sarcasm. Rebecca slid down to sit on the floor, her back against the door. She ate her own half of the sandwich in silence. On the other side of the thick oak, she could hear the faint sounds of him eating too. They were separated by a door, by social status, by a mountain of misunderstandings, but for a brief, strange moment, they were just two people sharing a meal. "Why did you come down here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He was silent for a long moment. "It was her birthday," he said finally, his voice thick with an emotion he wasn't trying to hide. "My wife's. I needed to be near her things for a minute." Rebecca closed her eyes, her heart aching for this angry, sad man trapped in a basement full of memories. The locksmith couldn't get there soon enough, not to free him, but to let her out of the complicated emotional cage she had just stumbled into. The 3 hours Rebecca spent in the Powers mansion felt longer than her entire 4 years of college. She played with Leo and his dinosaurs, read 3 chapters of a surprisingly advanced fantasy novel with Lily, and answered their endless, innocent questions, all while a low-grade hum of terror vibrated under her skin. Lily, with the unnerving perception of a 7-year-old, seemed to sense her anxiety. "Are you scared of my dad?" she asked, looking up from her book. "Your dad? No, of course not." Rebecca lied, her voice an octave too high. "He seems very reasonable." From the basement, a loud, frustrated thud echoed as Henry likely kicked a priceless antique crate. "He's very sad," Lily said, ignoring the noise. "He misses Mom. The basement was her favorite place. She called it her treasure chest." Rebecca's heart ached. She looked at the stoic little girl who was carrying the weight of her mother's absence with a quiet grace, and at Leo, who used boisterous play to fill the silence in the house. This wasn't just a job anymore. She had stumbled into the fragile, wounded heart of a family. Finally, the doorbell rang. It was the locksmith, a cheerful, burly man named Gus, who looked like he'd stepped out of a sitcom. "Got a sticky lock, huh?" Gus said, setting down his toolbox. "Let's see what we've got here." He peered at the 19th century German bolt lock, his eyebrows shooting up. "Whoa, a vintage Adler. Haven't seen one of these in years. Tricky little devils. Did someone try to jam a bobby pin in here?" Rebecca wanted to die. "There was a theoretical attempt at amateur locksmithing," she mumbled. Gus chuckled. "Happens more than you'd think." He set to work, and after 10 minutes of expert tinkering, clicks, and a final, satisfying thunk, the lock turned. The heavy oak door swung open. Henry Powers emerged from the darkness. He was covered in a fine layer of dust, his designer suit was rumpled, and his hair was a mess, but his eyes were blazing. He looked from the locksmith to the children, and finally his gaze landed on Rebecca. She braced for the storm. "Daddy, you're free from the dungeon!" Leo cheered, running to hug his legs. Henry's expression softened instantly as he scooped up his son. He looked at Lily, who gave him a small, relieved smile. "Hi, sweetheart." He put Leo down and straightened up, his full, furious attention returning to Rebecca. Gus, the locksmith, sensing the domestic drama, quickly packed his tools. "Well, all fixed. Just be gentle with her. She's an old girl, needs a little finesse." He winked at Henry. "Like most of 'em, eh?" Henry did not smile. He paid the locksmith, who made a hasty exit, leaving Rebecca alone to face the music. "Miss Morgan," Henry began, his voice dangerously calm. "My office, now." Rebecca followed him, her legs feeling like jelly. The children trailed behind, a silent, curious audience. His office was as imposing as the rest of the house: dark wood, leather chairs, and a desk the size of a small car. He sat behind it, the picture of a CEO about to fire someone. "Sit," he commanded. She sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her resignation speech already forming in her mind. He steepled his fingers, his blue eyes drilling into her. "In the span of approximately 4 hours, you have managed to lock me in a basement, nearly sabotage a $200 million merger, break an antique lock with a hairpin, and feed my children sandwiches of questionable structural integrity." "The smiley faces were structurally sound," she said before she could stop herself. He paused, a flicker of something. Was it amusement? Crossing his face before it was gone. "Despite this impressive resume of catastrophic failure," he continued, his tone all business, "my children seem to like you." Rebecca looked down at her hands. "They're great kids." "They are," he agreed. "They are also very fragile. They lost their mother. And I have not been the father they deserve. I work too much. I'm distant. I fill the house with staff, but I haven't filled it with warmth." He leaned forward, his expression changing, the anger replaced by a raw, startling vulnerability. "When I was down there, in the quiet, I could hear you with them. I heard you laughing with Leo. I heard you reading to Lily. I heard them happy, in a way I haven't heard in a long time." Rebecca looked up, her heart pounding. This was not the conversation she had expected. "My wife," he said, his voice dropping, "was the heart of this house. When she died, the heart stopped beating. It's just been silent. Until today. Today, for the first time in 2 years, there was life in this house again. Chaos, yes. Incompetence, absolutely. But life." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze intense. "So, Miss Morgan, I have a decision to make. My logical CEO brain is telling me to fire you on the spot, sue you for damages to the lock, and have you blacklisted from every nanny agency in the tri-state area." Rebecca swallowed hard. "And your other brain?" A slow, reluctant smile touched his lips. "My other brain, the one that is a father to 2 sad little kids, is telling me that you are a walking, talking, natural disaster. But you are a disaster that makes smiley faces on sandwiches. You are a disaster that made my children laugh." He was silent for a long moment, studying her, and she felt like her entire future was being weighed in the balance. "So, here is my offer," he said at last. "You are, without a doubt, the most unqualified, chaotic, and unprofessional employee I've ever had. But you're hired." Rebecca's jaw dropped. You're hired, on 2 conditions." "Conditions?" "1," he said, holding up a finger. "You are never, under any circumstances, to go near that basement door again. Martha will be the sole keeper of the key. And 2," he leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers, a new, playful glint in them. "You will teach me how to make those smiley faces. My attempts always look more like horrified screams." Rebecca stared at him, a laugh bubbling up from her chest, a laugh of pure, incredulous relief. You're serious?" "I have never been more serious," he said, but he was smiling, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "But, Miss Morgan?" "Yes, Mr. Powers? If you ever lock me in anything again, I'm sending you the locksmith bill." "Deal," she said, laughing. "Welcome to the family, Rebecca," he said, the use of her first name a small but significant shift. "Thank you, Henry," she replied, testing out his name, a sense of belonging, as terrifying and wonderful as it was, beginning to take root. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of adjustment. Rebecca threw herself into her role as a nanny with a fierce dedication, determined to prove Henry's unorthodox decision right. The house, once so silent, was now filled with the sounds of Leo's imaginative dinosaur battles, Lily's quiet reading sessions in the garden, and Rebecca's often off-key singing as she baked cookies in the kitchen. Henry began to change. He started leaving his office earlier. He'd appear in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching her cook, an unreadable expression on his face. "That smells good," he said one evening, as the aroma of chocolate chip cookies filled the air. "Want to try one?" she offered, holding out a warm cookie. He hesitated, then took it. As he ate, a flicker of a memory, of a life before grief had walled him in, crossed his face. "My wife, she used to bake." "I know," Rebecca said softly. "Lily told me." He looked at her, surprised by her gentleness. The old Henry would have retreated, closing himself off. But the new, basement-traumatized Henry just nodded. "She was good at it. She was good at everything." He started joining them for dinner. At first, he was a stiff, awkward presence at the head of the table. But Rebecca, with her easy chatter, and the children, with their unfiltered questions, slowly chipped away at his reserve. "Daddy, why do you always wear a tie? Is it choking you?" Leo asked one night, poking at Henry's silk tie. Henry looked down at his tie as if seeing it for the first time. I suppose it is a bit tight," he said, and to Rebecca's utter astonishment, he loosened it. Their conversations, once a minefield of sarcasm and authority, became a playful battlefield of wits. "You're burning the pancakes," he pointed out one Saturday morning as he walked into the kitchen. "I'm not burning them," she retorted, flipping a slightly too dark pancake. "I'm caramelizing them. It's a French technique." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that the same French technique you used when you tried to fix the toaster with a butter knife?" "That was an Italian technique," she said without missing a beat. "Completely different." He laughed, a real, easy laugh, and she felt that now familiar flutter in her stomach. He was a puzzle, this man. A grieving widower, a ruthless CEO, a lonely father, and she was beginning to suspect a man with a very big, very guarded heart. And she, the nanny who had been hired by accident, was finding that she wanted, more than anything, to find the key to unlock it. This time, without breaking it. The Powers mansion, once a bastion of solemn silence, was now a place of joyful chaos. The transition was so profound that even the ancient portraits of Henry's ancestors seemed to look down with a hint of bewildered amusement. Rebecca had brought more than just life into the house. She had brought light. Henry found himself smiling at things that would have once driven him mad. Flour dusting the countertops after a cookie-baking session with Leo. A colorful, chaotic finger-painting project left to dry on his billion-dollar mahogany dining table. The sound of Rebecca's slightly off-key singing drifting up from the garden. His house was no longer silent, and he discovered, to his own astonishment, that he loved the noise. His relationship with Rebecca had settled into a comfortable, playful rhythm. The sarcasm was still there, a constant current of witty banter between them, but now it was laced with a genuine, undeniable affection. "You left a dinosaur in my shoe," he said one morning, holding up a small plastic T-Rex he'd discovered when getting dressed. He was on a secret mission. Rebecca replied without looking up from the pancakes she was drawing a smiley face on. "He was protecting your foot from foot ghosts." "Foot ghosts," Henry repeated, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Of course. Why didn't I think of that?" He had fallen in love with her. The realization hadn't come like a lightning bolt, but like a slow, warm sunrise. It was in the way she looked at his children, with a fierce, protective love that was as real as any mother's. It was in the way she saw through his billionaire facade to the sad, lonely man beneath, and wasn't afraid. It was in the way she burned pancakes and called it a French technique. He hadn't told her yet. The words were caught in his throat, heavy with the fear of what they meant. He was a man who had sworn off love, who had locked his heart away in a basement of grief. And this chaotic, brilliant, impossible woman had, without even trying, picked the lock. Their fragile new world was about to be put to the test. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. Rebecca, who was in the middle of helping Lily with a difficult math problem, went to answer it. Standing on the doorstep was a woman so perfectly put together she looked like she'd been sculpted from ice. She was tall, blonde, and wore a Chanel suit with an air of effortless superiority. Her smile was a thin, bloodless line. "Can I help you?" Rebecca asked, instinctively feeling a prickle of unease. "I'm here to see my niece and nephew," the woman said, her voice as cool and crisp as her suit. "And you must be the help." Before Rebecca could respond, Lily came running to the door. "Aunt Charlotte!" Charlotte's icy facade melted slightly as she knelt to hug Lily. "Hello, darling, I've missed you." She looked over Lily's shoulder at Rebecca, her smile vanishing. "I am Charlotte Devereaux, Lily and Leo's aunt. My sister was their mother." The unspoken implication hung in the air. "I am family. You are the hired help." Rebecca forced a polite smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Rebecca Morgan, the children's nanny." Charlotte stood up, her eyes doing a slow, critical sweep of Rebecca's casual jeans and sweater. "I see. Henry didn't mention he had hired someone new." She walked past Rebecca into the house as if she owned it. "The agency he usually uses has much higher standards." The insult was subtle, but it landed like a well-aimed dart. The next few hours were a masterclass in passive aggression. Charlotte observed Rebecca's every move, a small, judgmental frown permanently etched on her face. "Lily, darling, your posture is terrible. A young lady should sit up straight," she corrected, as Lily was comfortably curled on the sofa reading. "Leo, stop making those dreadful roaring noises. It's unrefined," she chided, as Leo was in the middle of an epic dinosaur battle. The final straw came at snack time. Rebecca had made her signature smiley face cookies. Leo, delighted, was devouring his. "Refined sugar and processed flour?" Charlotte said, picking up a cookie and examining it with distaste. "My sister would never have allowed this. She was very strict about their nutrition. Organic vegetables, gluten-free grains." "They're cookies, Charlotte," Rebecca said, her patience wearing thin. "They're supposed to be fun." "Child-rearing isn't about fun, Miss Morgan," Charlotte retorted. "It's about discipline, structure, something that seems to be sorely lacking in this household lately." She looked around at the scattered toys and books with a look of pure disdain. "This place has become a chaotic mess." It was at that moment that Henry walked in. He had come home early, hoping to spend the afternoon with the children. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene, his sister-in-law radiating disapproval, and Rebecca standing her ground, her cheeks flushed with anger. "Charlotte," he said, his voice a low warning. "What are you doing here?" "Henry, darling." Charlotte's tone instantly became honeyed. "I was just visiting my precious niece and nephew, and I must say I am concerned." "Concerned about what?" "About the atmosphere," Charlotte said, waving a perfectly manicured hand at the room. "It's so unstructured. And the new nanny," she gave Rebecca a withering look. "While I'm sure she means well, she seems to lack the refinement necessary for raising the Powers children." Henry looked from Charlotte's cold, judgmental face to Rebecca, who was standing silently, her chin held high, a hurt but defiant look in her eyes. He saw the children, who had stopped playing and were watching the adults with wide, worried eyes. He saw the house, which Charlotte called chaotic, and he saw it for what it was, lived in, happy, full of the warmth that had been missing for 2 long, silent years. And he made his choice. "Rebecca is not the help, Charlotte," Henry said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "She is a member of this family, and her refinement comes from her heart, which is something you clearly wouldn't recognize." Charlotte gasped, her hand flying to her pearls. "Henry, how dare you?" "No, how dare you?" he said, taking a step forward. "How dare you come into my home and criticize the woman who has brought more happiness to my children in 3 months than you have in 2 years? You talk about my late wife's standards. My wife loved to laugh. She loved to be silly. She would have loved the smiley face cookies." He looked at Rebecca, his gaze full of a fierce, protective loyalty. "And she would have loved the woman who makes them." The silence in the room was electric. Charlotte was stunned, her face a mask of shocked indignation. Rebecca was staring at Henry, her heart pounding, a wave of warmth and gratitude so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. He was defending her. He was choosing her. "The children are happy, Charlotte," Henry continued, his voice softer now but no less firm. "They are laughing again. This house is a home again. And that is because of Rebecca. Her methods may not be in your etiquette books, but they are working, and I will not have you undermine that." Charlotte, realizing she had lost, drew herself up to her full, icy height. "You're making a mistake, Henry," she said, her voice a venomous whisper. "You're letting this common woman cloud your judgment. You're forgetting who you are, who your children are supposed to be." "No, Charlotte," he said, walking over to stand beside Rebecca, a united front. "For the first time in a long time, I'm remembering exactly who I am." Charlotte stared at them for a long, cold moment, her eyes promising a war she had no intention of losing. "We'll see," she said. "We will see if a court of law agrees that this is a suitable environment for my sister's children." She spun on her heel and marched out, the slam of the front door echoing through the now quiet house. The threat hung in the air between them, heavy and terrifying. A custody battle. It was the one weapon that could destroy everything. Rebecca turned to Henry, her eyes wide with fear. "Henry, she can't be serious." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "She's serious," he said, his voice a low growl, "but she has no idea who she's up against." He looked down at her, his expression fierce and determined. "She's not just taking on you, Rebecca, she's taking on us." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his embrace. The battle lines had been drawn, and as she stood there, wrapped in Henry's arms, she knew they would face it together. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat in the quiet living room, a tangible tension in the air. The threat of a custody battle loomed over them, a dark cloud on their otherwise bright horizon. "She can't win, can she?" Rebecca asked, her voice small, the earlier defiance replaced by a mother's raw fear. "I mean, she's their aunt. She has a name, status, and I'm just—" "You're the one they love," Henry said, his voice firm. "You're the one who makes them feel safe. That's what matters." "A judge will see that, but she'll twist everything," Rebecca said, her mind racing through the horrible possibilities. "She'll talk about my background, about how I was hired, about the basement." She shuddered. "She'll paint me as an unstable, incompetent gold digger. And I'll paint her as a vindictive, controlling snob who is trying to use two grieving children as pawns in her power game." Henry countered, his CEO ruthlessness surfacing. "This is a battle of narratives, Rebecca. And our story is better, because it's the truth." He moved closer to her on the sofa, his expression softening. "I will not let her take them from you. I will not let her take you from me." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration that was so much more than a promise of legal support. It was a promise of love, of partnership. She looked at him, at the unwavering loyalty in his eyes, and the last of her fears began to melt away. She had stumbled into this house as a chaotic accident, a walking disaster. But somewhere along the way, in the quiet moments and the loud, joyful chaos, she had found a home. She had found a family. "What Charlotte doesn't understand," Rebecca said, a slow, determined smile returning to her face, "is that she's not just fighting a nanny, she's fighting a mother. And mothers," she added, a fierce glint in her eye, "don't lose." Henry smiled back, his own eyes alight with a warrior's spirit. "No," he said, taking her hand, "they don't." He leaned in, and this time there were no near misses, no interruptions. He kissed her, a deep, passionate kiss that was a seal on their new alliance. It was a kiss that said, "We are in this together." A kiss that said, "The war has begun." The kiss had changed everything. The fragile truce between them had shattered, replaced by a raw, undeniable connection that neither of them could ignore. But the war Charlotte had declared cast a long, dark shadow over their newfound intimacy. True to her word, Charlotte acted swiftly. 2 days later, a sharply dressed lawyer arrived at the Powers mansion and served Henry with a formal court petition. Charlotte was suing for temporary custody of Lily and Leo, citing an unstable and inappropriate home environment and the presence of an unqualified and emotionally volatile caregiver. Emotionally volatile? Rebecca read the document, her voice a mix of disbelief and fury. "She's calling me unstable because I make smiley face cookies?" Henry's face was grim as he scanned the legal jargon. "She's not just calling you unstable, Rebecca. She's building a case. She has affidavits from a former housekeeper, one I fired for stealing, and a child psychologist who has never met our children but is willing to testify about the dangers of a lack of structure." "This is a nightmare," Rebecca whispered, sinking onto the sofa. "She's going to take them away from me." "No," Henry said, his voice a low, determined growl. He sat beside her, taking the papers from her trembling hands. "She is not. This is not a courtroom, Rebecca. This is a battlefield. And Charlotte just made the mistake of underestimating her opponent." "But Henry, she has lawyers, money, a name. And we," he said, turning to face her, his eyes blazing with a strategic fire she'd never seen before, "have the truth, and 2 very happy, very well-adjusted children." He took her hand. "My legal team is the best in the country. We will fight this, but we won't fight it on her terms." "What do you mean?" "Charlotte wants a messy, public court battle where she can sling mud and twist facts. She wants to drag your name through the press and make this a scandal," he explained. "We're not going to give her that satisfaction. We're going to do something she won't expect." A slow, calculating smile spread across his face. "We're going to invite the enemy into our home." A week later, a court-appointed social worker, a calm and observant woman named Mrs. Davis, arrived at the Powers mansion for a scheduled home evaluation. Charlotte was already there, having arrived an hour early. and had transformed a corner of the pristine living room into what she clearly thought was an ideal children's play area. Educational wooden blocks stacked in perfect, sterile towers, and a single, hard-backed book about the history of architecture open on a small table. She herself was dressed in a soft cashmere sweater set, looking every inch the concerned, loving aunt. "Welcome, Mrs. Davis," Charlotte said, her voice a smooth, practiced purr. "I'm so glad you're here. I've been terribly worried about the lack of educational stimulation in the children's environment." Just then, a thunderous roar echoed from the garden, followed by a shriek of delighted laughter. Mrs. Davis looked towards the French doors, her eyebrows raised in curiosity. "What on earth was that?" Charlotte asked, her perfect smile faltering. "That," Rebecca said, walking into the room with a plate of still warm, slightly misshapen dinosaur-shaped cookies, "was the sound of a T-Rex capturing a velociraptor. It's a very dramatic moment in their ongoing prehistoric saga." She offered the plate to the social worker. "Dinosaur cookie? They're still warm." Leo helped with the sprinkles. Mrs. Davis took a cookie, a small, amused smile playing on her lips. "Thank you, Miss Morgan." Charlotte looked at the cookie with disdain. "As I was saying, there is a distinct lack of structure." Her words were drowned out by another burst of laughter from outside. Henry, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, was on his hands and knees on the lawn, a giggling Leo on his back. "Giddy up, Daddy-saurus!" Leo yelled, waving a plastic dinosaur in the air. Lily was sitting under a tree with a sketch pad, drawing the scene and laughing. "Shall we observe the children in their natural habitat?" Rebecca suggested to Mrs. Davis, ignoring Charlotte's horrified expression. For the next hour, Mrs. Davis watched. She didn't see a sterile, structured environment. She saw a home. She saw Henry, the billionaire CEO, pretending to be a brontosaurus, munching on leaves from a bush while his children roared with laughter. She saw Rebecca sit with Lily, not to correct her posture, but to admire her drawing, pointing out how she had perfectly captured the ferocious joy of the Daddy-saurus. "Aunt Charlotte, do you want to be a dinosaur?" Leo asked, running up to his aunt. "No, darling," Charlotte said through a tight smile. "Aunt Charlotte doesn't crawl on the grass. It's unladylike." "Daddy says being unladylike is fun," Leo reported, before running back to climb on his father's back. Charlotte's face tightened. She had planned this day meticulously, hoping to showcase Rebecca's incompetence and the chaotic nature of the household. Instead, she was being confronted with a scene of such genuine, messy, and undeniable happiness that her own sterile perfection looked cold and alien in comparison. The turning point came later. Lily, who had been quietly sketching, suddenly tripped while running to show her father her latest drawing. She fell, scraping her knee on the stone path. It wasn't a serious fall, but it was enough to bring tears to her eyes. Before anyone could react, Charlotte rushed to her side. "Oh, you poor thing. Don't cry, darling. We need to be brave. Let's get you cleaned up. We'll put a bandage on it, and it will be as if it never happened." She tried to help Lily up, her movements efficient but emotionally distant. Lily, however, pulled away. Wiping her tears with the back of her hand, she looked past her aunt, her tear-filled eyes searching for one person. "Becca," she whimpered, holding out her arms. Rebecca was there in a heartbeat. She didn't say, "Be brave." She didn't say, "Don't cry." She just knelt and wrapped her arms around the trembling little girl. "Oh, sweetie, that looks like it really hurts," she murmured, her voice a soft, comforting balm. "It's okay to cry. Let's get you inside, and we'll make that knee feel better. How about a dinosaur cookie for your bravery after we clean it up?" Lily nodded, burying her face in Rebecca's shoulder, her small body relaxing in the warmth of the embrace. Rebecca lifted her into her arms and carried her inside, Henry following closely behind, his hand resting protectively on his daughter's back. Charlotte was left standing alone on the lawn, her perfect posture rigid, her face a mask of stunned defeat. She had offered efficiency and stoicism. Rebecca had offered comfort and a cookie, and the child had chosen. Mrs. Davis, who had watched the entire exchange from the porch, made a final note on her clipboard. She didn't need to see any more. She had seen a house that had been brought back to life. She had seen a father who had learned how to play. And she had seen a nanny who had, in every way that mattered, become a mother. When Mrs. Davis was leaving, she paused at the door and turned to Rebecca. "You have a lovely home, Miss Morgan," she said, her smile genuine. "It's clear these children are loved, safe, and incredibly happy." She gave a pointed look in Charlotte's direction. "That's all the court will need to know." As the social worker's car pulled away, Charlotte finally spoke, her voice a low, defeated hiss. "This isn't over." "Oh, I think it is, Charlotte," Henry said, stepping out onto the porch, his arm possessively around Rebecca's waist. "You came here to prove this isn't a suitable home, and all you proved is that you don't know the first thing about what a home is." Charlotte stared at them, at the united front they presented, and for the first time, she looked not just angry, but small. She turned and walked to her car without another word. The war wasn't over, but the most important battle had just been won. That night, after the children were asleep, Henry found Rebecca on the veranda, looking out at the rain that had started to fall. "You were amazing today," he said, coming to stand behind her. "I just did what any mother would do," she said, her voice quiet. "No," he said, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her back against his chest. "You did what you would do. You showed them that love is more powerful than any rule book." She leaned her head back against his shoulder, a feeling of deep, profound peace settling over her. The threat of Charlotte still lingered, but it seemed less terrifying now. They were a team. They were a family. "Henry," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "Yes?" "I love you," she said, the words coming out easily, naturally for the first time. He smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that was filled with all the love he felt for her. "I love you too, Rebecca Morgan." He leaned down and kissed her. A deep, lingering kiss that was a promise of all the messy, chaotic, and wonderfully happy days to come. The weeks following Mrs. Davis's visit were a period of blissful, almost surreal calm. The positive report from social services arrived, officially praising the warm, nurturing, and stable environment of the Powers home. Charlotte's legal petition was summarily dismissed by the court. She had lost, and the silence from her side of the family was deafening. For Henry and Rebecca, it felt like they could finally breathe. They fell into the easy, comfortable rhythm of a couple deeply in love. Their days were a chaotic, happy blend of parenting and partnership. Henry discovered he was surprisingly good at building complex Lego castles, though still terrible at making pancakes that weren't slightly burnt. Rebecca found that she had a natural, intuitive understanding of Henry's business, often offering insights that cut through the corporate jargon and got straight to the human heart of the matter. "You should be on the board," he told her one evening, after she'd brilliantly simplified a complex marketing problem that had been stumping his team for weeks. "And listen to you talk about quarterly earnings all day?" "No thanks," she'd teased. "I prefer our current arrangement. I provide the smiley face cookies, you provide the international conglomerate. It's a fair trade." He had never been happier. The silent, grieving house was now a home, echoing with the laughter of his children and the warm, vibrant presence of the woman he loved. The ghost of his late wife, once a constant, sorrowful presence, had gently receded, replaced by the promise of a new, bright future. He had found his second chance. But Charlotte Devereaux was not a woman who accepted defeat. Humiliated in court and spurned by her own family, her grief and resentment had curdled into a cold, vicious need for revenge. If she couldn't win the legal battle, she would win the public one. She contacted a notorious gossip columnist, a man known for his willingness to print sensational stories with little regard for the truth. She fed him a carefully curated, poison-laced narrative. The story of a grieving, vulnerable billionaire being manipulated by a cunning, social-climbing nanny with a mysterious past. She provided photos of Rebecca from her first disastrous day, emphasizing her unrefined appearance. She twisted the story of the basement, painting it as a bizarre, unstable incident. She presented Rebecca's love for the children as a calculated performance to win Henry's fortune. The story broke on a Sunday morning, splashing across the front page of a widely read online tabloid. The Nanny and the Billionaire, a Cinderella story or a calculated con. When Henry saw the headline on his phone, a cold, familiar rage seized him. The article was a masterpiece of character assassination. It was filled with anonymous sources close to the family, clearly Charlotte, who expressed deep concern for Henry's well-being and the future of the Powers' children. She appeared out of nowhere, one source was quoted as saying. One day Henry is a grieving widower, the next this chaotic, unqualified woman is running his house and his life. It's deeply troubling. Unqualified. Rebecca's voice was a quiet, wounded whisper from the doorway. She was holding her own phone, her face ashen as she read the article. Chaotic? Rebecca, don't read that garbage, Henry said, his voice tight. But it was too late. She scrolled down, her eyes scanning the cruel, twisted words that painted her as a villain, an opportunist, a threat. The story of her locking him in the basement was recounted in lurid detail, making her sound like a clumsy, unstable fool. They're making me sound like a monster, she said, her voice breaking. They're liars, he said, striding over to her and taking the phone from her hand. He pulled her into a fierce, protective embrace. This is Charlotte's doing. It's her last, pathetic attempt to hurt us. But people will believe it, Henry, she sobbed against his chest. They'll think I'm just after your money. They'll think I'm a terrible person. The people who matter know who you are, he said, stroking her hair. I know who you are. Lily and Leo know who you are. That's all that matters. But it wasn't all that mattered. By Monday morning, the scandal had exploded. It was no longer just a tabloid story. It had been picked up by mainstream news outlets. The narrative was too juicy to ignore. The reclusive billionaire, the mysterious nanny, the family fortune hanging in the balance. The Powers Court PR department went into overdrive, but they couldn't contain the firestorm. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. This time, their tone was not one of strategic concern, but of outright panic. Henry, this is a disaster, said one of the board members, a man who had been a friend of his father's. The brand is taking a hit. Our stock is volatile. This story makes you look weak, unstable. It makes the company look unstable. It's a personal matter, Henry retorted, his voice like ice. It stopped being a personal matter the moment it hit the front page, the board member shot back. We need you to issue a statement, deny the relationship, announce that Miss Morgan's employment has been terminated. You need to cut ties, Henry, for the good of the company. It was the same choice his mother had given him, repackaged in corporate language. Choose the company or choose the woman. Choose the legacy or choose the love. Henry looked at the anxious faces of his board members, men he had known his whole life, men who were now asking him to sacrifice the best thing that had ever happened to him for the sake of public perception. He didn't even have to think about it. No, he said, his voice calm and final. The room fell silent. I will not deny my relationship with Rebecca, he stated, his gaze sweeping the room. I will not terminate her. In fact, he added, a slow, dangerous smile playing on his lips, I believe it's time I clarified her position in my life and in this company. He stood up. Thank you for your input, gentlemen. I will handle this. He walked out, leaving the board in a state of stunned disbelief. He found Rebecca in the children's playroom, sitting on the floor, building a Lego tower with Leo. She looked up when he entered, her eyes full of a weary anxiety. They want you to fire me, don't they? She asked, her voice flat. They suggested it, he said, walking over and sitting on the floor beside her. He picked up a red Lego block. I told them it was a terrible business decision. She gave him a small, watery smile. Henry, maybe they're right. Maybe I should go. This is hurting you. It's hurting your company. Rebecca Morgan, he said, turning to face her, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. Do you trust me? Yes, she whispered, without hesitation. Then trust me on this. He took her hand. We are not going to hide. We are not going to issue a carefully worded press release. We are going to go on national television, and we are going to tell our story. The real one, from the bobby pin in the lock to the dinosaur cookies. Her eyes widened in terror. On TV? Live? Henry, I can't do that. They'll tear me apart. They can't tear you apart if I'm sitting right beside you, he said, his grip on her hand tightening. Charlotte thinks she can win by fighting in the shadows, with lies and innuendo. We're going to win by fighting in the light, with the truth. She looked at him, at the absolute, unwavering faith in his eyes. He wasn't just offering to defend her. He was offering to stand with her, to make her his equal partner in the biggest fight of their lives. Okay, she said, a new, fierce determination dawning in her own eyes. Okay, let's do it. Let's tell them our story. There's just one thing, he said, a mischievous glint returning to his eyes. What's that? You have to promise not to wear any shoes with slippery soles. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that chased away the last of the shadows. Deal. 2 days later, they were sitting on the set of America's most watched morning show, facing a journalist famous for her gentle but probing interviews. The nation was watching. Charlotte was watching. The board of directors was watching. Mr. Powers, Rebecca, thank you for being here, the journalist began. There have been a lot of stories circulating. I'd like to give you the chance to set the record straight. Rebecca, let's start with you. The tabloids have painted you as an opportunist. Who is the real Rebecca Morgan? Rebecca took a deep breath, her hand finding Henry's under the table. She looked directly into the camera, not as a nanny or a common woman, but as a mother, a partner, a woman who had nothing left to hide. The real Rebecca Morgan, she said, her voice clear and steady, is a woman who not too long ago accidentally locked her billionaire boss in a basement on her first day of work. A ripple of surprised laughter went through the studio. The journalist smiled, intrigued. I am a woman who believes in smiley face cookies, in being silly with children, and in the power of kindness, Rebecca continued. I didn't come into Henry's life with a plan. I came into it by accident. And yes, it was chaotic, but it was also real. The journalist turned to Henry. And you, Mr. Powers? The world knows you as a reclusive, powerful CEO, but the story being told is one of a man who has lost his way. Henry smiled, a warm, open smile that the public had never seen before. Lost my way? He repeated. On the contrary, for the first time in my life, I found it. He turned to look at Rebecca, his love for her clear for the whole world to see. For 2 years after my wife passed away, I lived in a silent house. I was a father who didn't know how to be a dad. I was a man who had forgotten how to feel. And then this woman, he squeezed her hand, this brilliant, chaotic, and unbelievably brave woman crashed into my life. She didn't just bring laughter back into my home. She brought my heart back to life. He looked back at the camera, his expression serious. The stories you've read are not about a gold digger and a fool. They are about a family, a broken family, that was put back together by love. They are about my children, who are finally happy again. And they are about me, a man who was given a second chance to be the father and the person he was always meant to be. He lifted Rebecca's hand to his lips and kissed it. Rebecca Morgan is not my employee. She is my partner, my best friend, and the woman I intend to spend the rest of my life with. The journalist was speechless, visibly moved. The studio was completely silent. In that single, honest, and profoundly moving speech, Henry had not just defended Rebecca. He had redefined his entire public identity. He had completed his transformation. He had made his choice, not in a boardroom, but in front of the entire world. The aftermath of the live interview was nothing short of a tidal wave. It was a national sensation. The clip of Henry's heartfelt defense of Rebecca and his declaration of love went viral, shared millions of times under hashtags like Team Henry and Rebecca and Smiley Face Cookies. The narrative had been completely flipped. Rebecca was no longer a gold digger. She was a folk hero, a symbol of authenticity in a world of artifice. Henry wasn't a fool. He was a prince who had chosen Cinderella. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. Talk shows debated their story. Social media was flooded with messages of support. Smiley Face Cookies became an ironic, overnight symbol of true love. One enterprising bakery in Brooklyn even started selling a basement lock-in special. For Charlotte Devereaux, the fallout was catastrophic. She had intended to create a scandal that would ruin Rebecca and bring Henry to heel. Instead, she had made them the most beloved couple in America and turned herself into a public pariah. She was seen as a cruel, manipulative snob, the wicked aunt from a fairy tale. Her social standing, the only currency she had ever valued, evaporated overnight. She was disinvited from charity boards, her friends stopped returning her calls, and she became a prisoner in her own gilded cage, haunted by the smiling faces of the family she had tried to destroy. Back at Powers Corp, the board of directors, seeing the massive positive PR and the subsequent surge in the company's stock price, did a swift and complete 180. They issued a public statement not only reaffirming their full confidence in their CEO Henry Powers, but also welcoming Rebecca Morgan as a valued and inspirational future member of the Powers family. Henry, however, wasn't interested in their corporate maneuvering. He had made his choice, and it had never been about the stock price. It had always been about Rebecca. In the quiet aftermath of the media storm, life in the Powers mansion returned to a new, more beautiful normal. The threat of Charlotte was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and security that felt blessedly permanent. The house was once again filled with the sounds of laughter, of Leo's dinosaur roars, and Lily's quiet, happy humming. Henry and Rebecca were inseparable. They were a team, navigating the joyful chaos of family life together. He learned that he was surprisingly adept at braiding Lily's hair, a skill he practiced by watching online tutorials with the same intensity he once reserved for market analysis. Rebecca, in turn, discovered that she had a knack for turning Henry's formal business dinners into warm, lively gatherings, charming his stiff corporate colleagues with her genuine interest and disarming humor. They were in love, deeply and completely. But there was still one thing left unsaid, one final step to take to make their accidental family official. One perfect autumn afternoon, a few weeks after the interview, Henry announced they were going on a family outing. He didn't say where, only that it was a surprise. He drove them out of the city into the winding, tree-lined roads of the countryside. They arrived at a place Rebecca had never seen before. A beautiful, sprawling apple orchard, the trees heavy with ripe red fruit. "An apple orchard?" she asked, a smile playing on her lips as the children scrambled out of the car, their eyes wide with excitement. "I thought," Henry said, taking her hand, "that we could do something completely, utterly normal today." For hours, they were just a family. They picked apples, their laughter echoing through the quiet orchard. Henry lifted the children onto his shoulders so they could reach the highest branches. Rebecca taught them how to find the ripest fruit, her grandmother's old trick of looking for the ones that came off the branch with a gentle twist. They had a picnic on a checkered blanket, eating apple cider donuts and drinking fresh, cold cider until their stomachs ached. As the afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting a long, golden glow over the orchard, Henry led Rebecca to a small, secluded hill at the edge of the property. From the top, they could see the entire valley spread out below them, a breathtaking tapestry of autumn colors. The children were a little ways off, happily chasing a butterfly. "It's beautiful up here," Rebecca said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It is," he said, his voice a low, soft murmur. He turned to face her, his expression serious, his eyes full of an emotion so deep it made her breath catch. "Rebecca Morgan," he began, his voice a little shaky, "the day you walked into my life, you didn't just lock me in a basement. You unlocked me. You broke down all the walls I had built around my heart, and you let the light in." He took a small velvet box from his pocket, the same one he had used to propose with smiley face cookies. "No, that's from another story." He took a small velvet box from his pocket. Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as she saw it. "You taught me how to be a father," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught me how to laugh again. You taught me that a home isn't a silent, but perfectly ordered space. It's a chaotic, messy, and wonderful place filled with love." He got down on one knee, right there on the grass, under the golden sky. "I know our story started with an accident, a misunderstanding, and a very stubborn lock. But I want to spend the rest of my life making sure our future is a deliberate, beautiful choice." He opened the box. Inside, a simple, stunning diamond ring sparkled in the late afternoon light. "Rebecca, you are the heart of my home, the love of my life. Will you marry me? Officially this time, with no dungeons involved?" "Yes," she whispered through her happy tears, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes, you ridiculous, wonderful man, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. He stood and pulled her into a deep, loving kiss that tasted of apples and sunshine and the promise of a lifetime of happy accidents. "Oh, kissing!" Leo's voice shouted from a few feet away. They broke apart laughing, to see their two children watching them with a mixture of feigned disgust and pure, unadulterated joy. "Does this mean Becca is our new mommy?" Lily asked, her voice full of a quiet, hopeful wonder. Henry knelt and pulled both his children into a hug with Rebecca. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, his voice choked with emotion as he looked at the woman who had completed his family. "Yes, it does." The wedding was a small, intimate affair held in the garden of the Powers mansion, the very place where Henry had first seen his children truly laugh again. It wasn't a society event, it was a family celebration. Lily was the flower girl, scattering red apple blossoms down the aisle. Leo was the ring bearer, carrying the rings on a small silk pillow with the solemn importance of a knight on a sacred quest. Rebecca, in a simple, elegant white dress, walked down the aisle, her eyes fixed on the man waiting for her, the man who had seen her at her worst and loved her not in spite of it, but because of it. Their vows were not filled with poetic platitudes, but with simple, honest promises. "I promise to always let you be messy and chaotic," Henry said, his eyes twinkling. "And I promise to try, and probably fail, to not burn the pancakes." "And I promise," Rebecca said, her voice full of love, "to always keep a spare bobby pin on hand, just in case." As they were pronounced husband and wife, and he kissed her under the autumn sky, the house behind them, once a silent monument to grief, was filled with the sound of their friends and family cheering. The heart of the house was beating again, loud and strong and full of love. That night, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Henry and Rebecca stood on the veranda, looking out at the quiet moonlit garden. "Mrs. Powers?" he said, testing out her new name. "How does it feel?" She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It feels," she said, her voice a contented sigh, "like I'm finally home." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. The reclusive billionaire and the chaotic nanny, a family born from an accident, had found their own, perfectly imperfect, happily ever after. The Powers mansion was unrecognizable. Not in its structure. The grand marble staircase and imposing portraits of Henry's ancestors were still there, but in its soul. The silence was gone, replaced by a constant, joyful hum of life. A slightly lopsided, hand-painted sign on the front door, crafted by a 6-year-old Leo, read, "Welcome to the Powers Family Funhouse. Beware of tickle monsters." Henry Powers, former reclusive billionaire, was on his hands and knees in the living room, a brightly colored blanket draped over his back. "Ruler," he growled, pretending to be a dragon. "I am the mighty dragon of Couch Mountain. Who dares enter my lair?" A 10-year-old Leo, armed with a foam sword, and a 12-year-old Lily, holding a book as a makeshift shield, giggled as they charged. "We do, you silly dragon." Rebecca watched from the doorway, a warm, contented smile on her face. She was holding a new addition to the family, 1-year-old Clara, a bubbly, bright-eyed baby with her mother's chaotic curls and her father's serious blue eyes. Their life was a beautiful, chaotic masterpiece. Henry had, to the shock of the business world, stepped down as the active CEO of Powers Corp. He remained the majority shareholder and chairman of the board, but he had handed the day-to-day operations to a trusted successor. His new self-appointed job title was Chief Lego Officer and Head of Pancake Operations for the Powers household. He had finally perfected the smiley face pancake technique. Rebecca, on the other hand, had found her true calling. She had never returned to being just a nanny. With Henry's full backing, she had launched the Lighthouse Project, a foundation dedicated to providing emergency support, childcare resources, and educational grants for single parents and nannies facing unexpected hardships. The foundation, funded by a significant portion of Henry's personal fortune, had already helped hundreds of families across the state. She was no longer just Rebecca Morgan, the nanny. She was Mrs. Rebecca Powers, a respected philanthropist and a powerful voice for caregivers everywhere. Charlotte Devereaux, after her public humiliation, had retreated from society. The custody battle had been the final nail in the coffin of her social standing. She had moved to Europe, a bitter and lonely woman, a distant, cautionary tale in the Powers family history. Okay, I surrender." Henry laughed, collapsing onto the rug as his children victoriously tickled him into submission. He looked up at Rebecca, his eyes full of a love that had only deepened with time. "We're outnumbered." "We always were," she said, walking over and sitting on the floor beside him. Baby Clara reached out a tiny hand and grabbed a fistful of Henry's hair. He winced in mock pain. "See? Even the new recruit is in on it." Later that evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Henry and Rebecca stood on the veranda, the same spot where they had shared their first real kiss. The night was quiet, the air cool and crisp. "You know," Henry said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder, I was thinking today about that first day. Ah, the infamous basement gate, she said with a laugh. My most professional moment. I was so angry, he admitted. I was trapped. My whole world felt like it was spinning out of control. I thought you were a sign that everything was falling apart. And was it? She asked, leaning back against his chest. Yes, he said, his voice a low, contented rumble. It was. My old world fell apart completely. And thank God for that. He kissed the top of her head. You didn't just bring chaos into my silent house, Rebecca. You brought it back to life. You brought me back to life. She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to cup his cheeks. And you? She said, her eyes shining with love. You saw something in that chaotic, clumsy nanny that even she didn't see in herself. You gave her a chance. You gave her a home. It was the best investment I ever made, he whispered, before leaning in to kiss her. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, a small, familiar sound echoed from the direction of the old basement. It was a faint click. They pulled apart, looking at each other with wide, horrified eyes. Did you? She began. I didn't touch it, he said, a look of pure PTSD-induced panic on his face. They rushed to the hallway and found Leo, in his dinosaur pajamas, standing in front of the basement door, holding the large, antique key. He was beaming. I was playing locksmith, just like Becca did in the story, he announced proudly. And I fixed the sticky part. It works perfectly now. He turned the key again. Click. Clack. The old German bolt lock moved with a smooth, easy grace it hadn't possessed in a century. Henry and Rebecca stared at the door, then at their son, then back at each other. And then they started to laugh. A deep, helpless, and utterly joyful laughter that filled the halls of the old mansion. You see? Rebecca said, wiping a tear of laughter from her eye as she pulled her husband and her son into a group hug. I told you I could fix it. Henry looked at his chaotic, brilliant, and completely unpredictable family, at the home that was once a silent tomb and was now a funhouse. And he knew, with a certainty that was the truest thing in his life, that he was the luckiest man in the world. He had been locked in a basement, and in the process, had finally been set free. What did you think of the story of Henry and Rebecca? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their journey from a locked basement to a happy home? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for everyone who has stayed with us until the very end, who believes that sometimes the biggest disasters lead to the most beautiful destinations, please comment happily ever after. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will change the world.